Good morning, everyone. Today on The Opposition with Dan Knight, we're joined by someone with deep roots in federal politics and a long record of public service. Kerry-Lynne Findlay, she's a two-time member of parliament, has served in cabinet, and most recently was chief opposition whip for the Conservative Party of Canada. She knows Ottawa inside and out. She's fought tough battles on key issues like justice, national defense, and now she's bringing that experience to the BC Conservative leadership race. This isn't a quick soundbite. This isn't spin. This is a full length conversation about principle, conviction, and what it really takes to lead from affordability to public safety to parental authority in education, party unity, and the broader direction of this province. Kerry-Lynne Findlay, thank you. Welcome to the opposition. How you
Thank
doing?
you so much, Dan. It's good to see you today.
I really do appreciate you joining us today. I listed off a lot of your accolades, like it was a resume. But who are you beyond the resume? I'd like to hear first off, who are you?
Well, I am a lawyer and a mother of four, and that's probably my proudest achievement. And I am an advocate, I think, by nature, someone who is called to serve by nature. I had a very busy law practice for many years, always a working mom. I was widowed at a young age with two children and then remarried, had two more. So we're a family that has moved forward together, the six of us. And all through that time, I had my professional life. I went through school early. My dad was a self-employed electrician. I was born in the big town of Ladysmith on Vancouver Island, which most people know for Pamela Anderson, not for me. And I am a person who feels we are at a critical point in our provincial history. This is my home. I've lived here all my life. You mentioned federal politics. I've given a lot of energy and time and years to that. But when your home is threatened, and I believe it is under the current regime, I feel I need to move forward. And I want to do it in my home, for my neighbors, for British Columbians. I guess that's sort of who I am. That in my nature, I'm someone who says, well, if there's a big job to do and I have the talent for it and the energy, which I have both, I believe, then I want to be of service.
I love that, and you're looking at your back to your resume. You won two different ridings. They're almost polar opposites of each other. Richmond East and South Surrey. So you have deep roots in BC here. Um, how is like being entrenched in both those communities like shaped your principles with community within those two ridings? Because I can't think of two different districts than Richmond to South Surrey.
South Surrey White Rock was the community that my parents retired to, so it became our family home. And I was probably more familiar with it than I was with Delta Richmond East in some ways, although I certainly spent a lot of time in Delta and Richmond. And we moved to the riding to Ladner, which is part of South Delta, but they're neighboring ridings. So there is a lot of back and forth between the two. The demographics may be a little different, but um, at the end of the day, all British Columbians want to have a peaceful life, want to be able to earn a living, want to have stronger paychecks, not necessarily higher wages, but they want their paychecks to go further. There's a lot of people struggling in this affordability crisis we're in the midst of. We have people in both communities who believe that we shouldn't be subject to a government that seems to think that we work for them instead of the government working for us. I think this latest BC budget told that story. It wasn't, I call it the no hope budget because it wasn't one that presented a vision for the future. It said, look, we've overspent. We've done a lot of no bid contracts with insiders. We have an ideological path we're going on. And because we've overspent, put the province in 183 billion in debt and with a deficit of 13.3 billion, we want you to pay more taxes at a time when people are struggling. 40% of British Columbians say they're $200 away from insolvency at the end of each month. We have 200,000 people a month in food banks. This is not the way it should be. We should be the most prosperous province, frankly, and the most prosperous nation in the world. However, that's not where we're at right now. And I see more commonality between the communities than I see division in terms of why we need to move forward. I'm running because leadership requires clarity. And over the past few years, I've seen politics change quickly. Here in BC, parties have rebranded, positions have shifted, but I don't think that core values should shift with political wins. Consistency builds trust, and accountability protects it, and competence earns it back. If you look at my record over the last many years, and I was always an advocate for my home province, if you see some of my speeches in Parliament, I've always stood up for home and British Columbia. And I think that clarity over who you are is very, very important in this race. I wasn't saying or writing something polar opposite just 2 or 3 years ago. And that's where I see people rallying around my leadership bid.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that a lot of the MLAs, with records, there is a lot of contradictions, from what they've said years ago versus what they said today. And I got called out on my last interview for not questioning one of your fellow candidates for their record on DRIPA, and the reason why I didn't question them is because the questions I've asked this to almost every MLA, and I'm like, what are your thoughts on this? And they're like, well, DRIPA was supposed to be symbolic, SOGI was supposed to be an anti-bullying tool, and I don't, and to be honest with you, Kerry, I don't subscribe to that. I looked at the legislation, or the SOGI program, and I looked at it, and immediately I had red flags. I looked at it and I said, this doesn't really. But the biggest red flag is I saw that there was no parent stakeholder. Um, you couldn't opt out of the program. That was my biggest concern. I don't really care about the ideology, but at the same point in time, it no longer takes me as a parent and makes me a stakeholder of my child's education. When I was growing up back in grade one, I had two students got pulled out of class, and we learned that had to do because their parents didn't agree with evolution. They were creationists. Whether you agree with that or not, I have to respect the parents' involvement as a stakeholder in their child's. Soji takes that out, and I look at the principle of that, and let me ask you a question, because we have the answer. The default answer is Soji. Soji was an anti-bullying tool. DRIPA was symbolic. What is the right answer for that? When I ask a candidate, why did you vote for that, and why have you done an about face? What is the correct answer based on principle, do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
It's a pivotal question, actually, because the people you're talking to were legislators. If you take that job seriously, you should understand what that means. And political trust doesn't automatically transfer with party name. Voters remember decisions, they remember outcomes, they remember how it affects their life. And that trust has to be earned carefully, honestly, over time. When I first heard that excuse, well, we were told by the NDP that it was aspirational. I'm talking about DRIPA right now. You put it in the law of the land. You unanimously voted for something that you, as a legislator, having done any research at all, should have understood is not aspirational. Aspirational is something you put in an op-ed or an article, or if you're an academic, maybe you do a thesis on it. But you do not legislate and then say, "Oh, I just thought it was kind of fluff." That the two do not go together, and then you end up with something like the Cowichan decision. That isn't a good enough excuse in my mind, and I think, in the voters' minds. You have to know what you're doing. This is where experience comes into it, perhaps. But as far as that goes, and the BC Liberals going along with many decisions in their last iteration that I think are the opposite than what a Conservative Party would do, that is just not good enough to say, well, the government of the day, who you are supposed to be the critics of in our Westminster system, said it was all going to be okay. It just doesn't work that way. And it's the same with SOGI, which I've said I'll repeal DRIPA. I've said I'll repeal SOGI. But when I say that, one has to understand why I'm saying that. And why I'm saying that is that on the DRIPA side, we do need economic partnerships. We do need government can't do everything alone. Economic partnerships with Indigenous First Nations are not a bad thing necessarily, but these kinds of partnerships have to work for all British Columbians. And that is the direction we should be going. We also need probably, and I have to see the books, I have to get in there and review them. I'm a little afraid to look at it, but I know I have to. That we need more private and public partnerships as well to get needed infrastructure, to get many things moving in this province, our resource rich province, where we're just leaving everything in the ground. So, on that issue, I have lived this. I've litigated it. And people are rightfully concerned, not just about their title and property rights, but about what it means to the equity in their title. The Musqueam First Nation and the government have both said, we're not after your title. Well, title is just really a deed, a piece of paper. As a lawyer, I've done conveyancing and I've helped people who had property disputes. At one time, 50% of my law practice was on Indigenous land issues. And that's because I was involved in the Musqueam dispute, as we call it, 25 years ago as a young widow and then a young mother, a working mother. I had moved on to a leasehold property on Musqueam First Nation. And at the time, it was a peaceful community. A year into it, the federal government changed the taxing authority from the city of Vancouver to First Nation. Then the provincial government said, we're going to change the BC Assessment Act, and you will no longer be assessed at fair market value, which at the time was about 50% of fee simple. You will now be assessed based on comparable fee simple off reserve. So all of a sudden, you had a taxing authority to whom you could not make any representation because only band members can do that. And you had to pay taxes at a rate that was double or triple what you'd been paying because now it was being assessed differently. Then there was a dispute about the amount of payment to make to the band every year, which was on top of the original investment that the original owners made. And that ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. I was on that team. We won that case because the demands of the First Nation at the time were excessive. And that is what the court ruled. Having said all that, having lived it and litigated it, the reality on the ground was that because of the uncertainty over Aboriginal governance and because of the dispute, appraisers would no longer appraise fair market value. Therefore, banks wouldn't lend or remortgage or refinance. You couldn't sell because you still held title, but all the equity is gone. So the fear is real. The uncertainty it brings into your property is real. When, if I might just add this, when the charter was repatriated and they were going through constitutional change in Canada, my understanding is that the then Alberta Premier Lougheed was standing up for private property rights to be entrenched in our Constitution. The first Prime Minister, Trudeau, would not agree. And in the end, that's how we got the notwithstanding clause. That was the compromise. If you intend to pass laws that a court may find or does find unconstitutional, you can use the notwithstanding clause and pay whatever political price that might be to move your political agenda forward. That's how that all came about. And when I talked at the time, I was advocating for the residents and I was the instructing lawyer to the legal counsel. I couldn't be a lead counsel because I was personally involved. People said to me, the idea of taxation without representation, that you should always have representation, is an American concept. It's not a Canadian concept. We don't have that here. This is a decision based in Richmond courts, but it affects the whole province. So we have to repurpose this, and reconciliation should be about economic development, economic partnerships, peaceful coexistence. But you cannot hold 95% of British Columbians hostage to what becomes a tyranny of the minority, the 5%, backed up by federal and provincial governments, where the judge said they did not even come here or make the argument for primacy of private property rights. They were absent in the field. Therefore, here's my decision. So that's what we're left with when our governments do not speak for us. They abandon all of us, 95% of us at least, for ideology. It's not the way to move forward. Legislators have to take control and they need to know what they're talking about. That's where experience counts. You need to know with clarity and focus how to move forward. On SOGI, just for a moment, the reason I would repeal that, and it's not actually in the curriculum, it's more in teachers' resources, but it's
It's a
been in
tool.
effect, yeah, it's been in effect weaponized and promoted by teachers' unions. They now want to bring in queering outdoor education, which is doesn't it's not a common sense proposal to me. What does that have to do with field trips and getting out in nature with the kids and teaching them about the benefits of the outdoors? But having said that, it is confusing many children, and there is inappropriate language, inappropriate teaching, inappropriate and not age appropriate materials in schools. I want to see our children getting the basic good education that they should, so that they are competitive in an increasingly competitive world. They should be learning their math, their sciences, their true history, not revisionist history. They should know about our great moments as well as our low points in our history. Those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. Therefore, we should learn about it and learn from it. But what is happening right now with SOGI, it is not just an anti-bullying thing. I heard BC Liberals saying that just before the last election in press conferences. It's just anti-bullying. If it was just an anti-bullying program, why would the parents be up in arms about it? Nobody wants their child to be bullied. One of my children went through that. It's very hurtful. And why would anyone want their child to be a bully? It's not about that. It hasn't evolved into that. It's been
I think
weaponized.
Oh, absolutely. I think even like back in 2020, it was weaponized. I mean, if you look at Laurie Thronis, he made a comment about voluntary conversations between individuals and counselors in terms of, is this right for you? Like, because, let's be clear, doing like a therapy that changes your body, doing hormone blockers there's no going back on that. That's permanent. And he framed it as protecting voluntary conversations between individuals and counselors. And right now, some of your fellow candidates during that election use the words to describe this view as abhorrent. Do you agree with that?
I was rather shocked by that, to be honest. And I don't know Laurie well, but I have met with him. I've talked to him. He's a very reasonable, common sense, average kind of guy, well educated, articulate. I've seen his speech in the House on this subject. I thought it was well reasoned, well set out. To say that somebody who has an honest opinion on something so controversial, that those views are, and I think it was Caroline Elliott, because I've seen the tape where she said, are abhorrent to me personally, that's a huge red flag to me. This is not a conservative. This is not someone who is looking at reasonableness, common sense, freedom of speech, which is under huge threat in BC, particularly highlighted by the recent BC Human Rights Tribunal decision, which brought down a punitive, life ruining penalty, monetary penalty against uh, Barry Neufeld, who said something similar. This is ideologically driven. How do you go from that to wanting to be the leader of the Conservative Party of BC and being premier? I
Oh,
mean,
I think there's a lot of
it's
questions. I think, when we look at the record of the and I'm glad you brought that up because, when we talk about the BC Conservative Party, to me, the BC Conservative Party is almost an indictment of the past parties. It's not an evolution, it's an indictment because you brought up SOGI and you brought up abhorrent. If I'm going to describe abhorrent, I'm going to use the word to describe the literature which is in our libraries, which our students have access to. That is abhorrent, and I can say that without a certain because Bruce Banman brought this to question period and was able to ask David Hevy read out some of this literature. He refused, absolutely refused. So let me ask you a question, and I don't want to stick on this too much, but let me ask you, Soji, should there be an opt out mechanism, or should we repeal it, reform it, or do we just keep it the status quo? Because we can't do all four.
well, we definitely can't keep the status quo. This is harming our children. And if anything I'm about, it's protecting the vulnerable in British Columbia. And that often means, it always means children, often means seniors as well, or low income people. Look at their housing policy, putting hard drug addicts, people who are really struggling in life. They want to put them next
Vulnerable.
to low income or in the same housing units as low income and uh, you know, vulnerable people, seniors and low income. They want to put, they call it supportive housing. Supportive of who exactly? Because there's a long history of that increasing crime, chaos, and disorder. We need to get away from that. When I'm premier, I'll make sure that public housing means that there is no drug use in public housing and that that housing, when it's appropriate to build it, is for vulnerable people, low income people. I understand that part, but that should be safe and secure. So we have an attitude that needs correcting. On the SOGI, it's hurting kids, it's confusing kids. I have so many parents say, I have my young, like, even kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 5, coming home very confused by what the teacher was pushing on them. Some don't talk about it at all, and others talk about it 3 times a week. They make it part of everything they do. They tell kids, and I've got many examples of this, "All right, in class today, I want you to declare your gender." Like, what is that about with young children? So this is harmful. It is indoctrination. And this is not where it should be in our schools. So I'm unequivocal on that. This has to be out. And not only that, if teachers are continuing to promote it when it is not part of their mandate, then there has to be disciplinary action. You have to change this and get back to where our kids come out feeling whoever they are. If they're having confusions, there should be enough counselors. If they are good in school, they should be allowed to move forward. If they need some help and support, that should be there. But at the end of the day, we want British Columbians, their children, to come out of school confident, ready to move forward, whether they go in the trades or they stay in school, not mired in this confusion. And if they come out where they've learned what they needed to learn and they have confidence in themselves. And I think sports too is a big part of that, encouraging physical exertion and education, that they will be competitive in a competitive world. Otherwise,
Well,
we're doing them a grave disservice.
I absolutely agree with that. I think that, I was looking at the curriculum recently, unless it's changed without my knowledge, but I don't even think that we grade our students anymore. And to me, I think there's a great disservice in that. I think that we need to learn to fail as a society, because if we don't learn how to fail properly, we don't know how to get up. We can't learn from our mistakes. We can't strive to be better. I think that by having sports, I think that that's a tremendous, it gives a lot of people, especially young people, especially myself in my, late teens, early 20s, gave me tremendous confidence in myself. Being able to build past barriers that we once thought were inachievable gave me tremendous confidence to always think outside the box. And I think that we're doing our students, I think we're doing our society a great disservice by taking that away from our kids. Um, I kind of want to pivot a little bit to federal politics. Currently, we've had Michael Maw, Chris did Enmont, and Matt Jenricks. They've crossed the floor to join the Carney government. I'd like to hear your thoughts about floor crossing in general, and does that? I think in my opinion, it seems it's almost like it disenfranchises people in voters specifically. What are your thoughts about that?
I agree with you on that. I think that if there is a floor crossing or someone signals their intention to cross the floor, I think it should trigger a by-election, whether it is federal or provincial, because as I said before, public trust does not automatically transfer from one party to another. I- And many people, when you cross the floor, feel very legitimately hurt and betrayed. They've put a lot of volunteer hours into your campaign. This is the party or the ideology or the people who you feel do not reflect your opinions and values. And then the very person you got behind says, I'm going to go over there. I think this leads to distrust of the whole political system by the public, and I understand why, and it makes sense to me that if you are so moved that you feel you need to go to the other team, so to speak, then fine, put it to the people of your constituency or your riding. Let them speak, and then maybe you win, maybe you don't, but you're under a different banner. I also think sometimes individuals running in politics get a bit carried away with themselves. They think that it's all about them. And actually, it is often about the party banner you're under. In fact, statistically, it is more so about that, the party banner, the leader of your party at the time that they're voting for or frankly against. It's not all about you. And statistically, you're actually a small part. It can make a difference in swing ridings, absolutely. And if trust is built up or you're well known in the community, that can be very helpful. But to think that because you've decided for your own, frankly, selfish reasons, hard to know in every case what those reasons are, because most of these people don't explain themselves. They just say, oh, even in this leadership race, where people have come behind someone else, they just say, well, I've now decided this is the person I'm gonna get behind. Well, 2 days ago, you were saying that wasn't the person. So
Yeah.
we need more authenticity in politics. We need people who, like you and I are doing right now, speak from the heart, are getting to what really matters, which is what is best for your constituents, for your province, for your country. It isn't about the ego of that one person. I was whip of that party for 2.5 years, a different time even because it was before the last federal election. There were huge swings in the polls. The Liberal Party brought in a new leader. Uh, with a snap election, there is just a lot of moving parts. But in the 2.5 years I did it, and this is something I offer to this party, I was able to keep people moving forward in common purpose. No one is going to agree 100% with each other on everything. What you need to do is find that 80% of commonality that helps you to move forward as a team. If you're in opposition, move forward as a government in waiting. Show that you have the focus and the drive to be government and to improve the lives of the people you're representing in your area of the province and overall as a provincial team. And the party, any party needs unity, discipline. You need leadership that brings people together around clear principles. I call it collaborative leadership. That's what I believe works best in politics because I've done that style and it works. And what I mean by that is you show respect to each other, your teammates, your colleagues. You treat each other as professionals. You, as a leader, get to know your caucus. I formed relationships as much as I could with federally with caucus members so that even if somebody was maybe not on the front bench, as they call it, maybe they don't have a shadow minister role, but maybe they have a keen interest. An example I often use is men's mental health. We lose 3 times as many men to suicide as women. It's a problem in our society. And a lot of men find it hard to speak up, particularly about emotional issues. So I believe that the men in our lives need that kind of support sometimes. And if somebody had a real keen interest in that, but maybe wasn't in the lead in the House, if that topic comes up in a committee, I would make sure they got subbed into that committee. I would make sure if there was a special conference they wanted to go to, that they could find their way to being there and participating. You get to know your caucus. That works. And then you move forward. There's so many big issues to tackle. Legal uncertainty on private property and education are just two of them. Look at our healthcare. Look at the big government overreach right now with Bills 21 and Bill 36, where they want to take over our self-governing professions that have worked to protect the public basically almost since our inception. These are institutions that need to be protected. They've taken away tort rights from accident victims. There's so much with this government that's about government control. And we've got a big job ahead. I believe if you approach that as a leader with respect, with a focus, you lead by example, and you engage your caucus. And that's how you move forward.
No, I don't disagree. I was talking to a clinical physician last week, and they were saying Bill 9 takes out
Mm.
the college board and replaces it with the government accountability. So now we have a double effect where government is now just like obviously these tribunals have been weaponized. I mean, you mentioned Barry Neufeld. Amy Ham is even a more notable case where she spoke out against women's spaces, and she was kicked out as her job as a nurse. Barry Neufeld, even worse, which he got fined $750,000 for talking about biological reality. I, I I don't disagree that we are moving into totalitarianism. I don't know any other way to describe it. I have a couple that I have a lot to unpack from with what you said. Um, I kind of want to just follow my previous question up with, do you believe that, being in a minority government like Mark Carney and getting floor crossers and doing this win at all costs strategy, do you think that benefits us as a society?
I don't. I believe that it actually undermines our democracy. There's a reason it's set up the way it is. You go to the polls, people speak through their vote, and then you live with that outcome. There are other governments. I'm thinking I was a cabinet minister in Stephen Harper's government. And in that government, we, for 2.5 years before I entered, because I came in with the majority government, but in the two iterations before that, they had minority governments. The last one went 2.5 years. It was all about making alliances to get your legislation through, trying to, argue your points, make the arguments so that people would come alongside you. And it was tough, but he did it for 2.5 years. This idea that you offer people something, I'm not sure what, maybe it's just a chance to be in government and they're tired of opposition, or they don't think they're being given enough of their own headroom. I don't know. I think probably there's differences in each case, but this is not democracy. I think it's undermining our democracy. This kind of let's cobble it together until we get a majority, and then we'll say, hey, we have a majority made up of floor crossers. And I don't know, I'm sure you know as much about this as I do, but the latest floor crosser from the NDP, from January to when she crossed the floor, literally 2 months, the federal Liberals poured money into Nunavut. Now,
Right.
if that's not
Oh, it's coercive.
basically giving somebody a reward and to get them to floor cross, I don't know how much more obvious that could be. And I think that is sad for our democracy. I think it undermines the Westminster system, how it was set up, and the way we followed this since Confederation. It's just not good enough. And I think that I'm surprised sometimes that more Canadians aren't not just angry about that, but insulted by that.
I think most are, but I also think that there's only so much bandwidth that every one of our tax-paying citizens can digest, and it's up to people like
True.
me to get the message out there. And we are doing our hardest because right now the mainstream media is bought off by Carney, and we're doing all. And if they were doing their job, I wouldn't be able to do this. So, Kerry, I really do appreciate you spending some time with us. The reason I brought that up is the elephant in the room. David Denhoff. He stepped down as your or allegedly he was your campaign manager, and you responded. And when he did, the Elliott camp, he said, I'm stepping down to join the Elliott camp, and the Elliott camp were fomenting. They were pushing that welcome to the team, and it surprised me that they were so embracive of this, especially with what's going on in federal politics, especially with what we're seeing with these floor crossers. And you responded, and I love your message, and I'm going to read it out right now. Is strong campaigns are built on structure, accountability, and execution. That's exactly what we were addressing last weekend. David played a major role in our team. He was never the official campaign manager. When someone is asked to step aside, there's a right way to handle it. Endorsing a rival on your way out isn't it. It's not principle. That's opportunistic. We know what we're building. We know why it matters, and we're getting it done. I'd like to hear a little bit more of your perspective on that.
I These are internal campaign manners, and I don't really want
No,
to belabor this issue.
fair
However,
enough.
it, my statement stands, and I just wanted to. I was surprised, honestly, by what was put up on X. Also, I felt a little sorry for my rival Peter Millibar because he got thrown under the bus in the same post, and he's not part of this at all. So I'm not sure how all that works. I guess that was a Elliott campaign directive. But these things happen in campaigns. We're moving forward. We're focused. I'm here doing your podcast today. I'm not
I appreciate
hiding
it.
out
Thank you.
somewhere. I'm not leaving the race. I've got a meet and greet in Abbotsford on Saturday. This is what you do. And sometimes changes need to be made to refocus or repurpose and just move ahead. And that's what I'm trying to do.
Respectfully, and I'm glad you addressed that because I think it answers a lot of people that are watching, a lot of people that are going to be questioning this moving forward. Thank you for addressing that. Let me ask you a question. Moving back to if you become leader of the BC Conservative Party, what about the independents that are currently sitting outside of legislature? We have right now we have Jordan Keeley, we have Eleanor Sturko, we have Dallas Brody, Tara Armstrong, and Amelia. What are your thoughts about bringing them back into the fold? And do you know if they want to be brought back into the fold?
I'm not sure of all 5. I have had conversations with most of them, or there have been messages conveyed. And my approach is this: if we are moving forward to build a team that is a viable alternative to the NDP, and there are people who see that as attractive and want to be part of it, then I am more than willing to talk to them. And I am open to seeing that happen. I think certainly it needs to happen with at least some of the independents, because otherwise it's a fractured choice. And what we want to do is improve the lot of British Columbians. We want to make life more affordable. We want to get our mills open again. 31 mills have closed down in 5 years. Bring processing back to British Columbia. Bring uh, refineries, and we've got Atlantic Canada buying LNG from Australia. This is ridiculous, and we have so much here we can offer the rest of Canada and the world. We need to be looking in that direction. So if people like what they hear from me, and many have reached out who are independent because they do like that, and they want to see a reliable conservative leading the party. That's what they're looking for. But they're going to see who comes out ahead. And if the person who comes out in the lead is not a conservative, they're not interested. So I understand that. I would probably feel the same if I was in their position. And I'm keeping the dialogue open and friendly, just like I am with most of the other campaigns. There's That's not true of each and every one of them, but the majority, we're definitely speaking with each other in friendly tones and keeping in touch.
Oh, and respectfully, I think that we need to have all walks of or all different diverse views. I think that we should be listening to everyone. And I think when we have a shutdown of conversations, we're no longer listening, and we're just pushing one agenda forward, and it might not necessarily be the right agenda. So I respect what you put out there. Um, Let me ask you a question about the past leadership, because obviously, they did some exciting things. They went from two to the official opposition. And, let me ask you a question. And I think they were about 180 votes away from, forming government. When you look back at the last leadership, what, in your opinion, worked and really what didn't? Like, why are we here now? Because again, you mentioned it like about learning from the past mistakes that we can move forward. What do you see those mistakes as, and how do we improve upon that moving forward?
I have a lot of respect for John Rustad. I think that he did a lot of things right in the beginning, but everything happened so fast. The dominoes were tumbling at that time, where there was a BC Liberal Party that rebranded itself as the BC United. There was a change in leadership there from Wilkinson to Falcon, and that they weren't resonating. One of the biggest mistakes they made, I thought, because I had so many calls on it from conservatives, was that they voted for the NDP motion to condemn the Freedom Convoy and say that the NDP handled COVID perfectly. I had so many calls on that just as a conservative saying, "What are they doing?" And I saw that their fortunes changed dramatically after that vote. So there's a lot going on over there. Then I believe that, and I think you said it earlier, the rise of the Conservative Party, and this is not a new party. I spoke to their AGM in 2020. So it's been a core group of conservatives who were involved for a long time, but it started to become a new version perhaps, or even more people getting involved, and they're saying this is our alternative. Perhaps more of an indictment, I think, was said on what was happening in the previous coalition government, as it was always put forward, and not for any
Well, you
bigger
you
or
said
loftier reason than that perhaps. But
well,
anyway,
you said you said you
yeah,
said you said it. I mean, the past government or the past Liberal Party was pro SOGI, pro DRIPA, pro carbon tax,
they voted
and,
for
and
all of this, right?
yeah, absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right. I think that voters saw that as, well, are we voting for NDP or voting for NDP light? And I don't think voters wanted NDP light. They wanted an opposition, and I think you articulated that perfectly. That voters wanted an opposition party, a true opposition party.
Right.
And I'm glad you brought that up because we brought up the carbon tax, and right now we have an industrial carbon tax which is being brought by Mark Carney, and we have provincial trade barriers within this province that are still hampering our productivity. And then I think the biggest barrier I see is this carbon tax, and what I mean by that is we have three shells, and we're putting our carbon, our greenhouse footprint here, and then we're just off moving it to China. And we're importing those products back here to BC and Canada. And we haven't done anything differently except move our manufacturing base off of, out of Canada. And I don't understand how anyone can see that as competitive. I don't understand how anyone sees the logic in that. Um, my question to you right now, and I think we're talking about affordability, we're talking about industrial carbon taxes. Look outside right now at what gas costs out on the street. It's over $2.10 a liter. What's the solution?
Yeah, I paid 2.20 a liter 2 days ago. Um, Cost a lot more to fill up the tank. Look, we need to have people able to move goods and services, move themselves, get their kids to soccer, go to events, go to work, and there's vast areas of our big province where there isn't transit. There's no GO train that gets you from, Smithers to Prince Rupert. Like it's just ridiculous, actually. Again, nonsense, not common sense. In any event, I have proposed that we axe the tax on gas, and that means gas and diesel. Every time that you add tax and you add whatever it is, carbon tax, here down in the Lower Mainland, GVRD tax, you TransLink tax, instead of providing funding for TransLink through efficiencies in government, they just add it to the gas. This is an everyday essential for most people. And when you add in the new clean energy fuel tax that's coming in, when I'm premier, you're going to be looking at over 44 cents a liter just in taxes. So I've said we need to get rid of that because that is passed on, as you are pointing out. If a trucker with all these taxes on diesel is and gas are bringing product to market, bringing your groceries to the grocery store, delivering products, that cost has to be passed on. And you end up not just with higher gas prices, but higher grocery prices, higher everything prices. We need more practical solutions. And if I can point out this for a moment, I was Minister of National Revenue for 2.5 years. At that time, I worked closely with the Prime Minister, with the then Minister of Finance, Jim Flaherty, a brilliant man we lost too soon, and after him, Joe Oliver. And during the time in office, Harper brought GST from 7 to 5%. We lowered personal income tax. We lowered corporate income tax. We brought in income splitting for seniors. We got back to a balanced budget and we left a surplus, and that was coming out of the deepest recession we'd had since the 1930s. It is possible. You need to focus. You need to understand that government is not there to burden the workers. The workers should have a government that supports them. Right now, they're crushing working men and women in this province by not opening up our job markets, by not giving opportunity, and then when you do earn a paycheck, by taking too much of it so that your disposable income is just shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. When the Stephen Harper government left office in 2015, our Canadian median income was higher than any American's median income, or higher than the American median income. Now we're below all the states. We're so it affects quality of life. It affects your mental stability, frankly, when you're struggling so hard to keep food on the table, pay your rent, pay your mortgage, pay your gas that you need to make your car run. All of these things are hurting regular folks, and we can do so much better than that.
I was at the Conservative Party uh, convention in Calgary, and I happened to speak to one of there was an observer there, and he had a farm out in Alberta, and I was asking him, like what's the biggest hurdle right now? I hear it's this cartel, and he's like, no, it's this industrial carbon tax. And I'm like, so what really adds to the price of food inflation? He said it's those taxes, it's those regulatory burdens. And it's just as you said, the gas that it takes to farm the product, to transport the product, gets passed on to the consumer. And I'm glad that someone's actually saying the quiet part out loud, because I think that we need to rein it in, because fiscal discipline, I don't think that nobody knows in government outside of the opposition knows how to spell it. And I think that that's important. But let me ask you a question. Deficits and spending discipline, where do you draw the line?
You have to, again, have focus. You have to make it clear to your executive, which is your ministers and their departments, that you are going to look at a review and expecting them to come back with solutions on how to reduce costs in a reasonable, common sense way. You need to have that as a core discipline of your governance, or else it never happens. These issues are too big to just deal with off the side of your desk. And it is punitive and not fair to say to hardworking people, we've spent too much of your money, therefore give us more taxes. That is not the answer. You have to bring competencies. In the federal government, we had something called DRAP, Debt Reduction Action Plan, and we were all tasked as ministers to look at that and do that, and we accomplished it. And we got back to some fiscal sanity. You can't do it overnight, particularly with a government that's been as reckless as this NDP one has been. And of course, you never know till you open up the books exactly what you're dealing with. And I suspect it's usually worse than you think. But even they have suspended all kinds of spending that they had promised because they just can't make it work. Instead of delivering, instead of taking projects that don't work and scrapping them, measuring outcomes, going at it with a proper discipline, they've just sort of abandoned it and said, oh, it's all just too much. And yeah, we spent too much. So give us some more of your tax money. They've even put tax now on bookkeeping and accounting and shoe repair. And I mean, every small business needs a bookkeeper. Why? Because the government puts so many rules and regulations that in order to be compliant, you need someone to help you with that. Well, you're trying to get viewers, customers, clients. You need someone who's got your back on that. 7% off the top. And then you make those people for the first time into tax collectors for the province. So now they have to fill out more forms and they have to be compliant and they have to report. So the outcome is not going to be just 7%. It's probably going to be 10, 12% when they add in their additional costs. The carbon tax is the same idea. The farmers are hurting. The farmers are hurting. 70% of them say they would not recommend to the next generation to go into farming. And yet, family farms has been part of our national identity. And on top of that, you have farmers in British Columbia who now have to worry about security of their title to their lands.
Right.
And I just gave testimony at the National Citizens Inquiry in Kelowna, and I was asked to do that as a lawyer and advocate because there were farmers being threatened by the CFI A, Canada Food Inspection Agency, an arm of government that's supposed to be there to support them, were being threatened that if they gave testimony, their payments would either be held up or suspended indefinitely. So I talk to farmers as an advocate, just a citizen, to go and say, this is what they're facing because they don't want them talking about mandatory culls and things like that. I mean, look what happened with the ostrich farm. I mean, this government overreach is punitive and unnecessary. So, there's an old joke. Hi, I'm from the government. I'm here to help. And they say you should run in the opposite direction. And there's a lot in that because if you just see government as a way to further your own agenda, it grows and grows without limit, without prudence. And it shouldn't be that way. The government should be the servants. The people should be the masters, not upside down world like we have right now.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. I subscribe to the model, and it's not just with government. I think that anytime large groups of people get together, unless they have a shared common goal, they default to incompetence. And that's why I think religions are highly successful because they all share a common purpose. But I also think that that's more true with government is that the larger it gets, the more incompetent it gets, and the more waste, corruption that we have. And I think that you look at the federal government is a perfect example, like $80 million for a QR code that was called a ride can. Like it boggles the mind. Kerry, I really do appreciate you. I'd like to close this out by asking why you, why now? And if you become leader, how do you defeat David Eby?
Uh, I think it's important here to say this that I am a conservative by conviction, not by convenience. And I think that's important to people. I think it's important to know that the person you're voting for is not going to change stripes, is not going to be an ideological floor crosser. It's very important to understand I am the only one in this race who has governed as a conservative. There is other people who've had elected office, although the majority have not. So they haven't even put their name on a sign before. And there's a skill set that goes with politics, that collaborative leadership. It's not like a business where you're the boss and you can just come in and say, I pay your way, so you listen to me and do what I say. Much more collaborative than that. We've got here in BC a resource rich province, but we've failed to act like that. We do need access to tidewater, not just for BC energy, but Canadian energy. It's not just a local issue, it's a national economic issue that BC is an integral part of. When we responsibly develop our resources, we create jobs, fund public services, and improve the standard of living for all British Columbians. That is also true of being more responsible with the public purse. So I'm running, and I believe I offer unique experience and talents. Even being a lawyer, you don't have to be a lawyer to be in politics, but we're facing so many complex legal and legislative issues that someone who knows how to look at complex issues, distill the essential points so that you can move forward. I think we need this at this time. And this is my province. I love my province. I love British Columbians. We need to do and pursue public policy that works for all of us. I have defended that in the past. I've defended my province, my home. And this is a new role where I believe we can do it again. We've had veterans and people who have given ultimate sacrifice in the past for our freedom. I really believe in the faith, family, and freedom idea that in a democracy, and if rule of law is to mean anything, then we have to understand that we must fight for them and defend them and not let government creep into every aspect of our lives and take it away from us. I wish, everybody could see that there is a way forward. I don't want people to lose hope. I don't want to see so many people leaving our beautiful province. I want to provide that hope, that optimism by being a leader that leads by example and shows that we can do it and that we have a bright future.
Respectfully, I love that. Kerry-Lynne, thank you for coming on. You've been in the
Thank
arena
you.
a long time. You've won tough races. You've served in cabinet. You managed caucus discipline as chief opposition whip. That's not theory. That's experience. And in a moment when moment is trying to, or excuse me, and at the moment when this movement is trying to decide not just who sounds conservative, but who can actually govern, experience matters. Your story is one of the time in trenches of knowing how power works, how it's lost, and how it's used. We appreciate you sitting down and answering the questions directly. To everyone watching, this is part of our BC Conservative Leadership interview series. Listen carefully, decide for yourself. Kerry-Lynne Findlay, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity, Dan. I really enjoyed it.
Look forward to seeing you at the debate.
Thank you.
If you're still here, good. It means you're paying attention. It means you're not asleep. You're not gaslit. You haven't been bought by the media spin or the liberal fairy tale that everything is fine while the country burns. I'm Dan Knight, and this is The Opposition. They have the consultants, they have the lobbyists, they have the legacy press, CBC, CTV, Global, spoon-feeding you government-approved talking points like it's North Korea, but with a better wardrobe. But we have each other. We've got the truth, we've got the grit, and we have the absolute audacity to stand up and say, no more. No more fake budgets, no more climate virtue signaling while our economy crumbles. No more surrendering your sovereignty to Brussels, Beijing, or Beltway elites. You can find me on Substack or Twitter, Dan Knight MMA, or on Instagram, and wherever honest Canadians are still allowed to speak freely. If you like what you heard, like it, share it, send it to someone who still thinks for themselves. We are building something here, not just commentary, but a coalition, a resistance to the rot, a community that refuses to bow, bend, or beg for permission. They have the legacy media, but we have you. And if we stick together, they don't stand a chance. Let's make it count. I'll see you on the next episode of The Opposition.